Hey everyone. So we're going to look at chapter 18 now. The Victorians meet the modern. This was often referred to as Victorian era. Really has to do with culture. Much American culture was reflective of British culture, Queen Victoria. So 1880 to 1917. The next few chapters are all going to cover these same years. We'll just be looking at different topics. This one is, again, sort of culture. We'll look at culture, we'll look at religion, we'll look at science, Darwinism a little bit, women's issues, sports, always fun. Women, men, and the solitude of self. So really, this chapter focuses on this turn of the century time period, this turn of the century period, and what it was like for men, women, black, white, Native American. Um, we're going to start with the family, how the family was different, how family changed in this time period. What was the average family? Well, we'll look at comparison between the 1800 and the 1900 family. So the average family in 1900 was about 3 to 4 children, husband, wife, 3 to 4 children. 1800, that was about 7. So the birth rate is half, having half as many children, shrinking a lot since the Civil War. It remained pretty steady up through the 1860s. But since the Civil War, a few changes, a lot more urbanization, a lot more cities, um, and large population moving into the cities looking for, with this. This is the American Second Industrial Revolution. So a lot of them moving into the cities, Industrial Revolution. Um, in 1800, farm families needed the children to work the farm, needed the boys working on the farm, needed the daughters helping the mother raise the other children, and doing things at home, taking care of the cooking, the cleaning, the churning butter and baking bread and fixing the clothes and all that kind of things. By 1900, in our industrial society, people were more focused on concentrating their resources to provide a better life for their children. Because there was lots of more opportunities in the cities for education, for careers, for professional work, and much of that required schooling. As we're going to talk about in a moment, turn of the century, education and schooling becomes far more important for many families. Couples married at older ages. We see marrying later. That also contributes, of course, to the decline in births. People do live longer lives, though, but there's a more of a focus on leisure activities. So you don't spend your whole life having and raising children anymore. I mean, sure, some people still do, of course. There's still lots of people that live rural. The majority of Americans still live a rural lifestyle, although that will be changing pretty soon. Um, you also can reduce children through birth control, either extended nursing, condoms, of course, diaphragms, abstinence. Uh, this was, we're not going to say common, but we're also not sure. Obviously, it's difficult to get statistics on this kind of thing. But of the evidence we do have, it certainly shows a significant amount of the population using some form of birth control to limit family size. No longer do they want 7 kids. They're wanting a couple of kids. You just simply don't need them anymore in the city. On the farm, you needed children to work, to help. In the city, they're simply a liability. They are more expense than any type of assistance. Very religious nation, of course, so birth control was difficult to come by. Very religious. Many states outlawed any type of birth control. You couldn't purchase it places. Um, so, yeah, birth control was a very touchy subject in this time period. The government, though, and don't let anyone ever tell you we really have separation of church and state in this country. We really don't. We never really have. The government intervenes as well, passed the Comstock Law in 1873. Comstock Law was a birth control law. It was a federal law passed making it illegal to send any type of sexual materials by mail. Um, and birth control was considered a sexual material. So if you wanted birth control, you either had to live in a state that allowed it. If you didn't, well, forget it. But you had to live where you could actually access it. If you were in a handful of states where you could order it or get it, or you'd have to walk into the store and purchase it yourself. This isn't something like almost everything else could be manufactured in the cities and then sent out on the train lines, distributed to the masses through the mail order catalogs and all things like that. Not birth control. This was the government passing a religious law, a moral law, very clearly. Industrialization also changes the tasks required of boys and girls. If you were at home in a rural community, you spun cloth, you helped with farm chores, you worked on the farm, you milked the cows, all that labor. Well, by the turn of the century, we see more and more people, more and more boys and girls leaving the home looking for paid work, farm to city, coming to the city for all the opportunities. It was also common for them to send money home because the expectation, the standard in the time period, was that the children were to help the parents and the rest of the family. That was simply the standard expectation. So, if you did go looking for work somewhere and you did leave the farm to go look for a job, you were generally expected to still help out, send some money back. A lot of boys and girls did that. A lot of teenagers and 20s did that. It was actually pretty common up until the time they were married. It was pretty common to do that. To assist parents struggling because the rural economy was pretty tough in this time period. The more and more we moved to industrialization and urbanization, became more and more challenging to be a small independent farmer. Typical, like today, there's very few small independent farmers in America. Almost all farmers, like 75% of farmers today, get subsidies from the government. Being a small independent, truly independent farmer in today's society in America, again, less than 25% of the small farmers can do that. So, yeah. And here you actually see, like in New York, the New York Society for the Suppression of Vice. This was actually the government creating an organization in New York to get people who were going to prostitutes or doing anything to do with drugs or abusing alcohol. It wasn't illegal to use alcohol, but abusing it, or of course, using any type of a sexual thing, sexual materials, pornography, or which did exist, anything like that. So the government has always stepped in on moral grounds in our society. This idea of a separation of church and state doesn't really exist. Uh, so the rise of high school education was critical for especially the upper class. The middle and upper class education became standard. It just became the standard thing to prepare for professional employment, to prepare for going and becoming a doctor, lawyer, minister. You wanted to have an employable skill. You wanted to do that. Now, if you were a girl, you would often get an education as well, but it was always just in case. Just in case of what? Just in case you couldn't get a man. That's what it was for. It was a woman's role once she became an adult was to be married and be a wife and mother. That was the expected norm in American society. Um, so you got an education, it really wasn't for yourself. It was for some reason, if you couldn't get a man, then you might have to take care of yourself. Or, especially for the really affluent, which still would arrange marriages. It wasn't common, but you could still find arranged marriages, especially among the upper class. Uh, you would do it so you could be a properly educated wife for a properly educated man. So when you had friends over and parties, you could converse properly. So really, if you got an education, it really wasn't for yourself. It was for your husband, it was for your family, or if you had somehow found yourself alone and unable to get someone. Education was technical, business education. Were probably the main types of education: technical, business, um, business, law degree, doctor, minister, something like that. This is both important for people in rural and urban areas. As industrialization came along, we also see the farm economy industrializing. using tractors, and especially we get the combustion engine coming along in this time period. So now you have actually engines, actually, you're not pulling your farm implements with horses or ox. So you need a technical education even to be a farmer now. It's not simply going out and putting some seeds in the ground and waiting for it to grow. You have to mix fertilizers, and you have to use certain strains of plants, and you need to use certain tools and machines, and you need to be able to repair those machines. So this education is not just for the city, it's for both rural and urban, because farming was a business. 90% of farm crops were grown to be sold, not to be consumed by the farmer. Most of their farm crops were sold on the market. It wasn't about farming to feed your family. About 70% of all people under 18 attended school of some sort. So if you were under 18, about 70% attended school, and about 25% commonly would be working. Now those numbers could cross over. Those aren't exclusive of each other. They could cross over. You could go to school and obviously work as well. So, um, and we don't consider work on a farm. When we say working, we mean working with a paid job. To actually look at the number of youth working on a farm, that number would probably be over 60%, 70%. Uh, Really, when we say working, that 25%, we mean in a city, because youth always worked on the farm. I was raised in the country. From the time you're young, you're working. Not paid for it, but you're working. Curriculum is very similar to today: literature, composition, history, geography, biology, mathematics, ancient modern languages, athletics. High schools were often co ed, colleges were not. High schools, though, were often co ed, and we do see the rise of girls' sports. We're going to talk about sports quite a bit in here, and we're pretty much only going to talk about men. But it should be noted that even though the focus on sports in this time period was on men, women had sports too. They had girls' sports, just like there was women's work, there was women's sports, and I'll mention some of those in a minute. Um, Interesting. It's interesting. So yes, a general education, or at the time, we often say gen ed today, but the more common term through most of our history would have been liberal arts, a liberal arts education, a little bit of everything, which is what high school is really. You get everything to prepare you to be a well-rounded individual. It's the goal anyway. Before I get to African American, let's just generally mention college. By 1920, only about 10% of youth went to college. Only about 10% went to universities. Ranging from technical schools, which were probably the most common. Technical training was probably one of the most common, and technical schools would be like to be a farmer, a professional farmer, like actually have not just go to school and get some training, but like real, like how to run a full business, how to operate farm equipment, how to repair farm equipment, how to balance books. I mean, it's really a liberal arts education for a farmer, because you need mathematics, you need accounting, you need to be able to English, you need to be able to write. Again, it's a business. You need, of course, engineering, agricultural skills. It's actually quite challenging. To run a farm independently requires you to be a master of everything. Or I guess it's better way. Maybe that's the wrong way to put it. Maybe the better way to put it is like a jack of all trades. You need to be a jack of all trades to be a really independent farmer. You have to be able to balance the accounting books and repair a tractor, both. It's actually pretty tough to be a good independent farmer. Of course, you'd have them all the way up to the elite schools, the Ivy League schools. We had the universities in America here all the way back to the 1600s. Harvard was founded in the 1600s. So we have, as a seminary school, interesting. So we have the elite education and very much the same kind of stuff. They focused on culture and philosophy and history, and honestly, not much different than high school. Most college education would have been classified as liberal arts as well, with just some specializations depending on what you're going to do. Very few women in college in this time period. Example, look at the graduating class here from this female college. there are 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 women. So in 19, I think it's 1901. So 1901, this university graduated 10 women. So yeah, pretty small. These are universities which are really small schools. I mean, there's universities that were, for instance, here in California. There are universities here in California. Some of the first ones started out with literally 3 buildings, 2 buildings. That's all it was. Handful of classrooms. It was much different than what we have today. What about African Americans? Specifically, African Americans had a much more challenging time getting education. The Tuskegee Institute was established by Booker T. Washington, 1881. He was a freed slave. Um, he establishes the school for industrial education, educated women and men in basically technical trade skills, how to get a trade job, whether it might be a construction, a plumber, pipe fitter, electrician, a teacher, these type of trade jobs. For nursing, nursing was also really big, women going into nursing, specifically for blacks, because there were no black schools, there were no colleges in America that really accepted blacks. So he created this school. He was really focused on trying to. Many civil rights leaders wanted to confront whites over racism. Many civil rights black leaders and a handful of white civil rights leaders believed blacks were being mistreated and oppressed and discriminated against and segregated, which they were all of the above. He didn't want to do that. He really didn't want to confront racism directly. He believed Americans were racist. He didn't hide that. But he believed that black people's best opportunity was to find something that was beyond race, and that was the color green, money. He believed training black people to get an education and go out and get jobs would be able to shoot for the middle class, independence, taking care of their families, and have money. Not rich, but self sufficient, self sustaining, independence. He believed shooting for the top was useless because whites would simply block you and push you back down. So he believed the one thing they might respect, they're not going to respect their skin color, but they might respect the color of their money. Um, Makes a lot of sense. Some civil rights leaders completely disagreed with that. W. Du Bois, for instance, was a shoot for the top type of guy, which I think I will mention him later. So yeah, lots of critics. Earn the money, you'll earn the respect, and you'll earn the independence and freedom for your family. That was his belief. To shoot for the top, the last thing I want to mention on that is you would become a target. To shoot and compete in the white upper class, to really try and compete for equality among whites, you'd put a target on your back, and the whites would destroy you. I don't necessarily mean kill you, but they would discredit you. They wouldn't let you advance. They would take away your opportunities. They would buy you out. They would, um, you would of course be a target of racism and terrorism. So keep your head down. Go get some training. Get a decent job. Take care of your family, and don't try to challenge the status quo right now. Later, but right now he didn't believe in the 1880s, 1890s there was any purpose. That was his belief. Higher education for women. Women attended single-sex schools usually. Um, Women's only colleges. Teacher training was very common, if they even did go to college, as demonstrated by the photo here. Very few women ever went to college. It doesn't mean they didn't want to. It simply was not the social norm. They often weren't allowed to, because to go to college as a woman, no college was free back then. Understand that there wasn't public college. If you went to college, you had to pay for it, and it wasn't cheap. For the time period, it wasn't cheap at all. So the only way you really went to college is if your husband or your father was willing to pay for it, or you yourself had a good paying job, which was very rare. So not many women did. Vassar College really believed they were giving women an equal education. Um, Vassar College thought that they could give women an education equal to that of males, for instance. There was Smith and Wellesley. There was always a fear that college would unsex women. I know, what does it even mean, really, right? That they would lose their feminine nature. That by getting an education, you'd be more like a man. That you wouldn't be womanly anymore. You wouldn't be feminine anymore. And of course, if you take away your femininity, then that has the implication that you wouldn't make a good mother or a good wife. The maternal nature of a woman was thought to be, in many corners of America and the world, frankly, being a good mother and wife was really the only role, a significant role a woman had in many cultures. And America was really there too. So, okay, I'm back. Let's see what else you want to mention there. They also had health programs. Women had curfews. Women, um, they had to take naps during the day. They had certain foods they had to eat. They had a prescribed diet. They had to they had etiquette training, how to walk, how to talk, uh, how to take care of children. They would even train you baby care, things like that. Very sexist, very sexist, and uh, I don't know if it's as much as misogyny. I don't know that it's like hatred or anything. It's just disrespectful for women. It was very disrespectful and sexist. As I said, education really was seen by most, and to be honest, most women as well, as simply just in case they didn't get married and have a man to take care of them. Let's stick with this for just 1 second. I haven't really addressed East versus West. In the East, this is what it was like in the industrial East. The further west you got, it was less bullshit. The further west you got, it was less of this garbage. You're actually in the West, you could find co-ed schools, co-ed colleges. Of course, there's literally in some community there might be 20 college students. So having two different gender schools really made no sense. So things were less different. You have more co-ed, you have more focused on vocational and teacher training and nurse training, um, and women had more opportunities in the West. Women had higher expectations that women had to contribute because in the West, which there was still much of the West was still frontier, it was still the Wild West. It really required the husband and wife working together to support a family. It was not in the city, it was reasonable in the middle class where a man could support a family. In the West, you needed husband and wife, everybody working together. So there was just less BS, really. More opportunities for women and more equality due to the nature of the environment and the nature of the entire socioeconomic system. Well, long-term effects, really good. It might sound like it's sexist and it's prejudicial. You know what it is? Yes, it is those things, but it also gives women education. For the first time in history, we have an actual open door policy. If you can afford it, there's an open door policy for women to get an education. And it's sort of acceptable. Even if it's just in case, hell, screw it. You're still getting an education. Once you get the education, if you don't want to get married, don't get married. So, I mean, most women do. But the opportunity is there for the first time where women can truly have some type of independence and freedom, job training, career training, and actually go out and get their own job and make their own money, independent of a man, father, or husband. So, while most women do end up marrying and having families, there is this feeling for the first time that women have a form of equality. And that is incredibly significant for voting because many of these women, they got educations at Wellesley and Vassar and Smith. You know what they went on to be? They went on to be suffragists. They went on to be women that were pushing for suffrage, the woman's right to vote. And just the very next generation, 1919, women get the right to vote, technically 1920. So the women who go to these schools, some of these very first women, college women, are the women who are pushing for women's equality and women's right to vote and participate equally in American politics. So the long-term effects on this are actually really good, and we were ahead of the curve in the world. We were one of the very first countries on the globe to give women the right to vote. Not the first, but almost the first. And guess what? Most of the rest of the countries followed suit after us, at least in the Western world. So, yeah, it's actually progress. That's another thing they call this era, the progressive era. We make some real significant progress. I didn't say at the beginning, but put it this way. If you took someone from 1880 and then time warped them to 1920, they wouldn't even recognize America. In a 40-year period, our country changes so much, it would be unrecognizable to previous generations. And one of these things is women's rights and women's equality. Not that they're fully equal by any means; they're not being treated fully equal, even once they have the right to vote. But it's a pretty big step in the right direction. When you consider that for thousands and thousands of years, women's social role in society had remained basically unchanged. And then in a 100-year period, they go from unchanged to near equality. Um, Even today, it still isn't fully equal, but it is just the change that's happened in just the last 100 years is staggering when you consider how little equality had changed for women in the previous. Well, let's go with recorded history. We've had recorded history now in some form for almost 5,000 years. So 100 years, we have 1,000% change over the previous 4,900. So it's actually a really big step. Um, let's talk about sports, masculinity in sports. Sports has become ubiquitous in American society. It's everywhere from the time you're a little child. Before you're even in school, in preschool, in kindergarten, you're playing some type of sports. Sports it's almost synonymous with being American. Um, the YMCA, Young Men's Christian Association. This was founded in Boston in 1851. It was the first promoter of physical fitness in the United States. YMCA still going strong. It advocated vigorous exercise for young men, claiming it would make them clean and strong and healthy Christians. They advocated what we more generally call muscular Christianity. And yeah, the idea of being a strong and healthy Christian, well off, fit, um, very interesting. Advocating vigorous exercise hand in hand with Christianity. Um, in the 1890s, we see all kinds of other new sports come along. I'm going to mention several here. I'm going to mention baseball and football specifically, but lots of other sports happen. Mostly like baseball and football, most of the stuff starts in the mid 1800s, mid later 1800s. But 1890s, we have volleyball and basketball and all other kinds of indoor sports. Also began with YMCA's. And the reason for that was Northeast, snow. Hard to play a lot of those outdoor sports when there's a foot of snow on the ground and it's 20 below. So you have to invent indoor sports to deal with the winters. And that was the whole purpose in creating indoor sports. All sports originally were outside, all of them. There were no indoor sports until the late 1800s. And they were created specifically because before, people played some sports, but it wasn't like an obsession. Now you had to have sporting activities 24/7, 365. And therefore, you have to create a whole slew of indoor sports for all of the winters. Um, Many arguments over who should participate. Who? What? I mean, everyone, right? No, actually, originally sports were generally only regularly regularly done, for lack of a better way to put it, by the middle and upper class. Poor people were discouraged from participating in sports because it distracted them from their more important duty of working in the factories and producing all the manufactured goods. Not to mention, you worked 6 days a week, 60, 70 hours a week. Did you really have a lot of free time? No. When you had free time, it was generally either dealing with your family, drinking, or sleeping. You didn't really have a lot of free time for sporting activities. Sporting was seen as a leisure activity for the better off. And there was a lot of disagreement over who should be participating. The YMCA didn't even allow working class common people. Originally, YMCA was only for the upper class, middle and upper class. Today, YMCA probably caters more to the low class, the working, the lower class, lower socioeconomic class. It did start out that way. Matter of fact, all sports started out that way generally. Almost all of them started at the top and then worked their way down to the common masses, all of us, the regular people. Businesses also. We also see businesses using sports to build camaraderie, to build teamsmanship, if that's a word, teamwork skills. The idea being very simple: if you learn to be a team on the field, you'll work better and be more of a team in the factory or on the sales floor or in the office, whatever. Over time, sporting events expand to everybody. They become all across America. Baseball is really an odd one. Baseball actually is the only real outlier to this. Baseball started as a common man sport, as stickball, being played in the streets. There's even some indication that it might have been played as early as like back during the Civil War by the soldiers. Some version of like baseball. It's actually really unclear exactly how baseball began. There's multiple stories. It's like the hamburger. There's a dozen different places that say they all invented the hamburger. There's actually multiple different ideas behind how baseball was invented. Nonetheless, it does become a very popular sport. It spreads in popularity, and it becomes a professional sport after the war. The first official league was founded in '76, and the first World Series in '03. Many employers encouraged company teams. This is again became a way of building teamwork and camaraderie and trust that would hopefully would transfer into the business. Um, Also, advertising. Company teams were often advertising. This was the era of big advertising when it begins, where they sell your dreams. Well, advertising became a big part of sports as well. Another thing it encouraged them to do was not drink. Uh, During the day, it was common for people to drink. It was really pretty standard. Most businesses gave breaks around 10 a.m. and around 4 p.m. And most people would go and have a beer. So it encouraged them to not drink during their off time or their off periods because they should go out and do sports. Be clean and strong, muscular Christians. Um, Christianity tied into everything, folks. Socio-political, cultural, sports. Christianity was part and parcel of our society. Uh, well, all of this was for whites. So, what did people of color do? They had to form their own leagues we commonly call the Negro Leagues. Uh, Black people did not participate in the white professional sports teams till after World War II, really. So before that, if they wanted their own teams, they had to make their own teams, pay for their own teams, pay for their own uniforms. There was no sponsorship really. Um, Discrimination, segregation was common. The black and white teams never played against each other. All the professional sports teams, all the big money, and it wasn't like big money, but all the money and all the notoriety, the fame went to the white teams and the white players. Uh, the ballparks, things like that, the stadiums, the football, baseball stadiums, all that, only white teams played in them. Black teams didn't get to play in them. They let the college teams play, but they wouldn't allow any black team to play. So this was common. I also want to backtrack for slightly and say how people got paid. Not in any way, shape, or form like today. Back then, most athletes, even the professional ones, had another job during the time they weren't training or competing. So when they were playing baseball for 5 months out of the year, the rest of the year, they'd be working in a factory or working in an office. They made literally a couple $100. It was nothing like today. Nothing at all. It doesn't even, it's not even comparable to what sports has become today. Football began in the 1880s. It was Ivy League. Began in the Ivy League's college teams. Football begins in the college. I would assume it is probably a derivation of rugby. I would guess. I've never really looked it up. A very controversial sport. Violent and deadly. Every year people died. Sometimes half a dozen people in a single year. They didn't wear the big pads and all the helmets and stuff they wore today. They wore a simple helmet and regular clothes with some little bitty padding. The kind of stuff they wore back then, if they were to run face to face with today's football players, today's linebackers, they would literally kill them every time. Not to mention our players are a lot bigger today. The average football player today is almost 80 pounds heavier than your average football player 100 years ago. Much, much bigger. And that heaviness is also probably a lot more muscle too. Bigger, stronger, tougher. Uh, yeah, people died all the time. This was almost like a version of, what do you want to say? Almost like a version of like gladiatorial combat, a blood sport. People loved it. They would pack into the stadiums, standing room only. Uh, People loved it. First teams were Pittsburgh, Green Bay, Chicago. It takes a long time before it really becomes professional. We really don't see what the first Super Bowl is until what, the 1960s or something. So it takes a long time before this really takes off as a big professional sport. Most of the time, it is overshadowed by baseball. Even hell, even basketball overshadows football. So yeah, this is one of those things which is interesting, which shows how they were taking Native Americans and trying to assimilate them into American society, and it shows the ultimate assimilation. This is a Chilocco Indian school where they took Native American children and tried to make them into white children. Dress, religion of Christian, their language, everything. They tried to take the Native Americans and make them into whites in every way they could, other than, of course, skin color. This was one of the ways of assimilating Indians. Um, well, what greater assimilation is there than teaching them to play football? Teaching them to play one of the most American sport, very, very common sport in America. And as you can see, you have the white coach here. Just interesting how assimilation had always been about being a farmer and a Christian and a citizen. Now assimilation includes education and sports. Uh, to be a real American, you have to know how to play American sports. That's interesting. A woman here, Frances Benjamin Johnson, a self-portrait. This is unusual for the time period. Why would it be unusual? Think about it for a minute. Why would this be unusual for the time period? 1903, a woman by herself, because this is a self-portrait. So it's like a camera with a timer on it. So a woman by herself out in the mountains. She's obviously middle or upper class based upon her clothing. She owns a camera with a timer. Why would that be unusual for this time period, given everything we've talked about with women? Think about that. Might be a good discussion question. It's interesting. There's a lot of things to talk about there, about nature and about women and status. A lot of interesting issues there that could be talked about. Let's talk about the great outdoors. Just in 1890 alone, there were 10 million bicycles in the U.S. Now, we think half of those bicycles are being used for commuting back and forth to work, of course, but the other half were thought to be used for leisure activities. Along with this rise of sports, we get the rise of outdoor activities, which also becomes significant. Not just men, but women wearing looser clothing, women giving up their corsets, going out into the public, going out and doing exercise. The women's sports, which I didn't mention earlier. What were women's sports? Just like women had certain work they were supposed to do, clerical, nursing, things like that. Women had sports, archery, golf, anything that didn't involve touching other people or getting hot and sweaty. Although it's really probably not true, right? I mean, you got, I would imagine, dressed, because if you've ever seen women golf in this time period, they're basically dressed from their neck to their ankles, whether it's archery or golf, sleeves all the way down to their wrists. So don't tell me they weren't sweaty and hot in that. So, but I guess it was more about getting dirty. Women didn't do anything, or they got dirty, and they didn't do anything that involved physical contact. That would have been improper. That would have been unfeminine. That would have, to use the language of the time, it would have unsexed them. You didn't want that's kind of stuff guys did. Men did. Women did not do that. People going to the parks, the beach, going out to the country, outside sports, camping. All of this occurs in this time period. This is where it really starts. America's preoccupation with outdoor activities and sporting. Well, the government makes it happen. Really, don't get me wrong. There were always small parks and things like that, but the government really steps in and makes this a national objective, a national priority. In the early 1900s, we see the government setting aside national parks, national monuments. Teddy Roosevelt, president from 1901 to 1909, he does a lot of this. He sets aside, he's the one who signs the Lacey Act in 1906. The Lacey Act is the one that allows the president to set aside lands for national monuments and national parks. We really started focusing on setting aside land to be preserved because we realized what we were doing. If you looked back east, we had cut down every tree. We had built everywhere we could. I mean, there were places back east where there were thousands of square miles where there was really no forest at all. Everything had been cut down and built up. Um, so we started to realize the American West was beautiful, was gorgeous, lots of resources, and we needed to start preserving some of that before, in 100 years, if we hadn't actually done this, in 100 years, the whole West would have looked just like New York. Everything cut down and built on top of. Grand Canyon is the first national park created as part of the Lacey Act in 1906. It wasn't really our first park, but it was huge. Something like 800,000 acres, massive. Um, Later, we get the creation of the National Park Service in 1916. This department of the U.S. government specifically to manage all of the parks. Today, we have hundreds and hundreds. If you add up all the parks, the national monuments, the national preserves, the national forests, you add them all together, and we have hundreds of different locations across the U.S. That doesn't even include all the independent historic sites that are managed by the Park Service. We actually have two different branches of government now, two different departments that manage our national environment in two different ways. We have a National Forest Service now. You have the Department of the Interior, and there's another one. So, yeah, this is we actually preserve more of our lands than any large industrial country in the world. That doesn't mean we have more open land. I mean, look at Russia. Russia has more empty land than the entire United States. But we actually preserve more of our lands for protection, and we improve them and build hiking trails and roads and bridges and all kinds of things, more than any other industrial large country in the world. There's always a debate over what using it, though, how to use it. Do we just set it all aside and put a fence up and say, don't touch it, it's here for recreation only? What parts do we not allow any viewing at all there? You can't go there at all because it has to be preserved in its natural environment. And then, of course, the more and more we charted out the West and explored the West, we found resources we wanted to use. Large forests, oil reserves, mineral reserves. Can we use those? So there was always a big debate. And what we ultimately ended up doing was almost a 50-50 split, to where some of the lands we would fence off and leave in their natural way, and other lands we would fence off that could only be used for the government or be sold by the government. Land rights by the government to generate revenue for the U.S. government to sell to private businesses to cut down the trees or mine the oil or cut or mine the iron or whatever. So we've really walked this line the whole time since. Well, with our preservation of the natural environment, it only makes sense we start having environmentalists appear, people who want to preserve the environment in different ways. In California, we have someone who's sort of a state hero, John Muir. We have over 100 things in California named after him, from parks to roads to bridges to schools. He is, again, he's sort of a national hero. He founded the Sierra Club, or pardon me, a state hero, a Sierra Club in '92 for the purpose of exploring and preserving the Pacific coast. The animal, specifically really about the natural environment, is what he was focused on: the mountains, the trees, the flora, which is the plant life. The Audubon Society was created really to preserve the fauna, the animal life, preserve bird species, seals, sea lions, calling for protect them, all these different species. Because the more and more humans grew and expanded, the more and more we encroached on these lands. We cut down the trees and killed the animals and took them for their furs or fished out the rivers and lakes. So many organizations and groups, these are just two, there's lots of others, developed to try and protect all these native species before we simply wipe them out. Well, we also now have to have laws determining when you can hunt, where you can hunt, how much you can hunt, Where, when, how much. So we have wildlife hunting laws that really appear to deal with all these new natural lands. Um, Generally speaking, hunting was seen as recreational. Most hunting was seen as a recreational sport. Yet the reality was, many people in the West were subsistence hunters, meaning they actually hunted to feed their families. They needed the food to live. Of course, Native American tribes did. Most Native American tribes still needed to hunt for subsistence, which they had a real challenge doing. But lots of settlers in the West, white settlers, also wanted to hunt to feed their families. They weren't out there for trophies. That doesn't mean they didn't take a trophy and put a set of horns up on the wall. But then they also skinned the animal, used its skin, ate the meat, and, they used it. They didn't just kill it for the trophy, even if they did keep a trophy. So now you're a subsistence hunter. Yesterday you could go out and hunt for deer for your family. Today you go out there and there's a fence up says no trespassing, U.S. government property. What the f, right? I mean, what are you supposed to do now? How do you feed your family? Oh, you can hunt deer. Oh, sure, you can still hunt. You can hunt 6 weeks out of the year if you buy a license. Really? So to feed my family, I can only hunt 6 weeks out of the year and I have to buy a license anyway. You can see how there would have been a lot of disgruntled and upset people. And by the way, this still exists today. There are still people who challenge these hunting laws, that they should be able to go out on the natural lands and hunt. The hunting laws are so restrictive now. You can't even if you can't even hunt animals on your own land. It's against the law to hunt animals on your own land if it's not in season, even if it's on your own property. So yeah, there's a lot of people that had problems with this, but ultimately the government won out, and this is the way it is now. You can only hunt during certain times of the year, certain animals on certain places, and you have to have a license, and that's the way it is today. So I guess you better go hunt all the deer you can in the 6 weeks, and then pack it all in the freezer. I guess that's what they do. This just shows you the parks. You can see back east, very few. Why are there very few back east? Think about that for a moment. I really already told you. Well, in West, you see many, many parks. We preserved a great deal of the land. Almost 50% of all land west of the Mississippi River. No, not Mississippi River. I apologize. The Rocky Mountains. About 50% of all the land west of the Rocky Mountains is preserved in some form. Understand what you see on the map here is just the national stuff, national forests, national parks. This doesn't include all the state parks, all the county parks, all the local parks. So yeah, when you actually add it all together, almost 50% of the entire western U.S. is actually preserved in some way. And a whole variety of different laws. Some are entirely open use, some require licenses, some are closed completely, some are used for harvesting resources. But still, it's pretty crazy. Crazy in a good way. How much of the land, because we still have, I mean, there's still large parts of America that are still empty, frankly. So it's going to be a long time before we really need to use up these lands. Uh, so it shows you, Alaska, Hawaii, Puerto Rico, Virgin Islands. So yeah, we preserve parks and lands all across America and our territories. We are one of the biggest countries in the world that does things like this, preserves our land for recreational use and for, time to hopefully protect it forever, to keep it protected. But women in the public. So we'll switch here to women in the public sphere. From female moral authority to feminism. The idea of maternalism often drives women's roles in American society. Maternalism is often used to justify women's work in the public. For most of history altogether, women were kept in the private. Home, family, wife, daughter, stayed on the farm. Not really supposed to be out, going to the market, shopping in town, things like that. That wasn't something women were really supposed to do. Women learned in this time period to use their quote unquote special talents to get out in the public, using their special talents as mothers, as Christians, as moral leaders to go out in the public. So at home, you take care of your children, you teach your children. Well, Why can't I then be a nurse in the public? I can't be a teacher in the public. And that's what women do. They use their maternal skills that everyone says is most important for a woman to justify, well, I teach at home, therefore, why shouldn't I be able to go teach and learn how to teach other people? Or I nurse my kids, so I should be able to go be a nurse. And so they use this idea of maternalism, which had for most of history been used against them, saying your only place is in the home, taking care of your kids and family. They're turned it around and they say, you're right, we have those skills as a mother, as a daughter, as a home taker. Guess what? We should use those skills in the public now to be able to get out in the public, which is what women did. Millions of women did this to get out in the real world, to get an education, to get a job, to get money in their pockets, to get independence, and if they chose to not marry, to be independent and free if they wanted to do this. Women's Christian Temperance Union. This was founded by this lady right here in the picture, Frances Willard. It advocated prohibition of liquor as its most important cause. And this directly tied into their most important need at home, according to the WCTU, and this is a public group of women using the idea of maternalism in the public, forming this public association, WCTU, for home protection, saying the most important problem was alcohol, and the problem alcohol caused was women being abused, women and children being abused. Today we'd use the term domestic abuse. I don't think that term existed back then. The term they would use was home protection. They advocate for home protection by limiting or pushing men to limit their drinking. So the chain of event was pretty simple. Men went out and drank after work, went home and beat their kids and wives. This was the rationale of WCTU. Therefore, if you prevent the men from drinking, they will not beat their wives and kids. There's lots of other reasons for domestic abuse, but alcohol is one of them. Alcohol is a cause of domestic abuse, even though there are definitely others. And of course, just because you drink doesn't mean you will commit domestic abuse. Of course not. But for the WCTU, one equaled the other. Excessive drinking equaled abuse of children and women, and therefore they advocated for the home protection. They were the first public group to prevent domestic violence in their version of it. Although again, it was totally blamed on alcohol. And temperance is this. Temperance is limiting drinking, not necessarily prohibiting drinking, but limit your drinking to where you don't become drunk. And it has a double advantage of one, you don't commit abuse, and two, of course, you save money. A lot of money is spent on alcohol. So, WC2 also brought women together from rural and urban. Remember, this is no telephone yet, so the rural-urban divide was pretty much like a wall. If you lived out in the country, you never went to the city, and if you lived in the city, you never went to the country, and the two never really crossed over. The difference between rural and urban America, well, it was like total opposites. It would be like stepping from the 1800s into the 1900s, a century. It was just going from rural Ohio to, say, New York. Again, it would have been a whole other world. It would have been alien. So this divide was huge. WC2 helped bring women together. They do mailers, pamphlets, they do meetings, they have organization branches all across America. They have regional county meetings, statewide meetings, all for the idea of trying to protect women and children from their own husbands. They founded soup kitchens, free libraries, they investigated prisons. These are all reform efforts WCTU advocated. Investigating prisons, free libraries for kids, soup kitchens for abused women. They advocated for an 8-hour workday. An 8-hour workday, of course, would improve the lives of the family. It would allow more family time together. One of the reasons a lot of men drank was because their lives were so miserable at work. 12, 14, 16-hour days, sweating in a factory under terrible conditions. You drank to simply forget how miserable your life was. You go to an 8-hour workday and life is going to be less miserable. It's going to be less challenging. You're going to have a more satisfying life. You won't have to drink as much. Of course, you might think, well, it gives them more time to drink. That wasn't the idea. The idea was they would have a more enjoyable work environment so they wouldn't be so sad and depressed all the time to want to drink away. They also advocated for ending child labor. Um, and they were certainly instrumental. WC2, this educated women were certainly instrumental in helping getting suffrage passed in 1919. Feminism was also born during this period. Um, in essence, this idea, well, feminism at its base, the simplest definition is equality for women. Simply a woman having full equality equal to a man, having the ability to do anything a man does. The National Trade Union League was a group which advocated for women's equality. I don't think they would use the word feminism, but that's what they were advocating for basically. Also should note, the Christian Temperance Union was not a union of workers. It was more of an association, an organization. However, the National Trade Union League was an actual workers' union of workers. So definitely different things. Um, they thought women and men should be treated equally. They didn't believe in a separate sphere. They didn't believe in this private sphere and public sphere, where women have to be in the private or they're trying to fight to get to the public. The National Trade Union League argued there really wasn't separate spheres. In other words, women should be able to go anywhere. Because were there separate spheres for men? No. Men weren't supposed to be in the private or the public. Men could go wherever they wanted. They could go from the farm to the city and back, and to the market and back, as many times as they wanted. There was no restrictions on the men having to stay in the private, the home, the farm, the house. And National Trade Union argued women shouldn't have that either. Women should be able to go anywhere men can go. This doesn't really manifest, but they push for it. They try. Heterodoxy Club is formed in New York, for instance, organized in New York City for intellectuals, journalists, labor organizers, teachers. The handful of educated women. And New York had more educated women than any other place in America. Matter of fact, college graduates in New York were equal to all the other states combined. So we had the most liberal, the most progressive society in New York, for instance. So these intellectuals, these journalists, labor organizers, teachers, they supported women's rights, especially voting rights. Also instrumental in helping getting voting rights passed. And they're also the first ones where we see the word feminist being used. They're the first group to use this term feminist to indicate they were asking for full and equal rights for women, the same as men. They should be able to do anything, have any job, and go anywhere a man can go. It should be noted, most people did not buy into this, men or women. This was not a majority feeling of any group, of any section of America. Most Americans did not push for feminism. Most Americans wouldn't even be able to, wouldn't even recognize the word. Men or women. This was a minority, this was a small group. It really was. The social norm had been ingrained into American culture, European culture, of both women and men since you were little children, since you were babies, of a woman's place and a man's place. So this was certainly a minority group, which makes it even more significant if you think about it, or more amazing that this group, these types of women, do actually get an amendment to the Constitution passed. Great example here of another good discussion question. You have Mr. and Mrs. John Singer Sargent, Mr. I.N. Phelps Stokes. Oh, I apologize. John Singer Sargent's the artist. Mr. and Mrs. I.N. Phelps Stokes, 1897. This is really interesting how the woman is in the front and center here. The man is in her shadow figuratively and literally. Literally, he's in her shadow. She's the center of the picture. She has a smile on her face. She's got sort of manly attire. I mean, other than the skirt, from the waist up, she's got a dress shirt, a tie, a jacket, a hat. I still never really, in your book might actually tell you, I've never really I always wondered where the hat is, his hat or her hat. Anyway, think about it for a moment. Think about what this says in regards to what we just talked about. Feminism and women's equality and women's rights and this movement for this. Do you think this is part of that? Do you think this would tie into that? Good question. It's a really good question to think about. how this might directly tie into all those things we just talked about with women's equality, women's feminism, um, and this new opportunities for women that they'd never had at the turn of the century. I think it's interesting. Think about the painting, think about who commissioned the painting, why it was painted, the significance of their positioning, all those kinds of things, and how it might tie directly into what we just talked about. This just shows you dates for suffrage of the states. This is when states gave women the right to vote inside their state. That still doesn't mean the national right to vote, like for president, for instance, but in the state. And I believe it was, which one was it? Wyoming here I have is 1890, but that's interesting. I swear I had in my notes at one point that Wyoming gave women the right to vote as early as 69. It's interesting. This map shows 1890. Well, it is still the first state, and I do believe it was the first state to give women the right to vote. And the reason for this was probably to draw families there. Since women didn't go alone to the West, if a woman went to Wyoming, she would have brought her husband and kids with her. She would have gone as a family, or she would have gone there and become a wife to one of the single men, because a lot of the early settlers, of course, were single men to go out and become homesteaders, miners, cattle ranchers. So it would have brought the women to Wyoming. By Wyoming giving women the right to vote. And that entire region there, it became sort of a traditional idea of giving women the right to vote to draw women or draw families there. And then, of course, the West in general, these other blue states give women the right to vote, 1910 to 1918. Then by 1919, these pink states give some type of suffrage, maybe not full suffrage. Because suffrage indicates your ability to vote, but also the other part of it indicates your ability to run for office. That's full voting rights, to where you can vote and you can actually also run for those offices, because some states give women that. They could vote, but they couldn't actually run for office. And then look at the states that give no voting rights to women ever, until they're forced to when the Constitution changes in 1920. What do these states have in common? Look at all these states. What were almost all these states just a few years earlier? Yes, they were all slave states. States which have made it a history of being discriminatory and prejudiced, even till today, even to modern times. These are states which are still have a history of being discriminatory and prejudiced against minorities and women and immigrants. Still today, these are some of the states that we have the most civil rights violations in America, even in modern times. So it's no surprise that these states are the ones that did not ever give women any equality, because they had a history of denying equality to people who were not white male. Slaves, women, blacks, immigrants, Latinos, Native Americans. Um, it was simply part of their culture. White men are the only ones that were able to have any authority or power. So, not surprising they never gave women any type of rights until they were forced to when the Constitution changed in 1920. Then all women had the right to vote. All right, so next we're going to look at domesticity, we're going to look at missions, and we're going to talk a little bit about women's work. Few women actually saw themselves as feminists at the turn of the century. Most didn't really think it was attainable, or they didn't expect equality. But there was a handful that were publicly active. One of those groups would be women that worked in churches, doing public outreach. Again, using the idea of feminism to do things to help, to this idea of maternalism, the idea of maternalism, to help. Often as part of these religious outreach groups, they could sponsor Christian missions in the Western U.S. And we say Western, I mean Western United States, which was, again, sort of the Wild West, and women were often on their own out there. The men would be gone for days at a time doing work, and the women would be left alone on the farm, in the home with the kids. They even participated. Now, the most of the women who were involved or participated in this were middle class white Protestants. There were some Catholic missions as well, but mostly this is Protestants. Women's National Indian Association also reached out to help Native American women on reservations. Native Americans were often the most disadvantaged groups socioeconomically in America. They provided money. They provided charitable labor. They helped build schools. They helped educate. It was certainly with a bit of a condescending overtone. It was moralistic. They were there to raise up the Indians from their primitive, uncivilized nature to make them Christians, farmers, citizens, to give them a quote civilized home life. It was definitely condescending and it was racist, but it did help some. It did do some and give some assistance, some medical care, some education to Native Americans, which were, generally speaking, entirely left out of American progress, American society. Um, the West Coast, San Francisco, for instance, they focused on prostitution, trying to assist in ending, or help the women involved in prostitution. While a lot of women became prostitutes voluntarily, just as many women were forced into prostitution, effectively sexual slaves. And so these women's outreach missions in the Western U.S. would try to help women, white, black, Asian, try to help them escape prostitution and sexual slavery. But outside the country as well, we see women as part of families, as part of missionary Christian groups going overseas, Africa, Asia, uh, Central America, South America, going, and they usually went as families. They usually tried to model the family, to be the model family, the husband, wife, and the children. They would take their entire family overseas, sometimes for years at a time, to try and Christianize and bring a civilized life to Africans. As you can see, for instance, in the photo here, they would do this. They believed they were doing the work of God, the Protestant God. Um, they often wanted to send, as I said, they sent these model families to demonstrate the proper role. So where the father was in charge, the woman was secondary, the children were obedient. Um, Women did sometimes go as educated. You do see women occasionally going as nurses or teachers, but it was very clear that they were modeling a patriarchal lifestyle, which was standard in America and Europe. Male dominated, male led. The men were the priests, preachers, the ministers, and the women were secondary. Um, Although we do have some educated women getting in this. We do see converts in these other countries. We do see Christian ideology being spread around the world slowly. It's these other places. And they're impressed, sometimes impressed by women's knowledge, medical knowledge, or education knowledge. Because even though women had limited opportunities in the US for education and training and schooling, most of the world, 90% of the women were completely illiterate, having no opportunities at all for education or uplift of any sort. So even though America may have seemed prejudicial, discriminatory towards women, and it was, most of the world was still well behind us. We were progressive in many ways. However, on the darker side, the other way to look at it is this was racial imperialism. We saw these people as a country, we treated them as inferior, as uncivilized, as heathens, as sometimes unintentionally, I'm sure, sometimes it was unintentional, spreading this idea of racial imperialism and the idea of American superiority over these dark skinned peoples, who were almost always darker skinned and non Christians, and also less technologically advanced, less technology than we had here in America. So this certainly does spread into our ideology of racism and prejudice to uncivilized indigenous populations, which is most of the world as compared to, say, America or Europe. That really sort of ties into Darwinism. No, let me correct myself. Social Darwinism. It doesn't really tie into Darwinism, but it does tie into this social, this pseudoscience, meaning a fake science, this pseudoscience which claimed to be real but wasn't, social Darwinism, which comes out of Darwinism. Social Darwinism is certainly tied into this idea of racial imperialism. Darwin on the Origin of Species is actually a much longer title, but we abbreviated. On the Origin of Species in 59. He argued that all creatures struggle to survive, but some are born with certain mutations that make them better fit for an environment. We call this natural selection. Over generations, a group of birds, one bird will be born with a bigger beak. The bigger beak means it can crack bigger seeds. It can crack bigger seeds, it can eat more food. If it can eat more food, it's going to be bigger and healthier, which means it's more likely to reproduce. And over generations, guess what? All the birds have bigger beaks because the one finds a way to adapt to its environment through a natural mutation that makes it bigger, stronger, more powerful. And since it's the one which is more likely to reproduce, then given many, many years, and we're talking millions of years, all the birds will have larger beaks, for instance. So anytime you have a natural mutation that makes a species able to survive or cope better or reproduce better, that mutation gets passed on to its offspring, and the mutation becomes part of the species, and it has evolved. Well, he argues this is natural selection. It simply happens naturally. It happens, just random mutations that happen. And by the way, it can go the other direction too. You can have birds born with smaller beaks. Most likely that bird is not going to pass on its genes because it will not be able to compete with the other ones. It will get less food, it'll be less healthy, it'll be more sickly, it'll be less likely to find a mate. So nature naturally selects those that are to survive and those that are to fail through just natural random mutations. This is true. We have established this is science. This is fact. This is biology. This is evolution. It is a scientific fact. At the time, this was a new idea. This was a certainly new and controversial idea that comes along. Very controversial because what it implies is two things. One, that species are constantly changing. Species are constantly changing. Evolving is the word we use, although it needs to be clear, occasionally they go the other direction. It doesn't always go positive. Sometimes mutations are negative, as I already demonstrated. But it also indicates something else very important. If all species change over time and either get better or worse, what are humans? A species. Therefore, Darwin's ideas, which he never ever talked about humans, by implication must also apply to humans. We also evolve or devolve and have natural mutations. Well, into this comes social Darwinism, which is a pseudo-fake science that was portrayed and many people believed was a real science. This leads us to these ideas of Herbert Spencer. Herbert Spencer was a British philosopher. He claimed that humans over history had advanced through competition, and they advanced through this competition of what he called survival of the fittest. Survival of the fittest has zero to do with Darwinism. This is not a term Darwin ever used. It's not a scientific term. So this idea of survival of the fittest, which he says, and of course the fit are the most survived. The ones that generally survive and grow are the ones that are the most fit. The ones that are able to overcome their enemies, overcome other humans. There is a little bit of truth in that. We do see that the most human civilizations which prosper are the ones that are able to dominate their competitors. They're the most fit. They have the most money. They have the most military. They have the most resources. This has nothing to do with natural evolution in any way or natural selection. It's simply an aspect of human societies. That's why it's called social Darwinism. It's just an aspect of human societies. There is some truth to survival of the fittest. A little bit. That humans have advanced through competition. Because in what really we have, I mean, we can say technologically the reason we develop new technologies through most of human history has been to overcome other humans. Better weapons, better guns, better bombs, better horses, better ways to produce food, bigger cities, bigger walls. Generally speaking, competition among humans is what caused the human species to advance. That is true. However, then it totally goes off the rails. Then it really doesn't tie into Darwinism. That's another problem. That really has nothing to do with evolution, natural selection, which is biology and genetics. That has really nothing to do with it. Then it goes completely crazy with William Sumner. William Sumner is a sociologist, and he's a sociologist here in America at Yale. And he takes the idea further, and he claims the fittest in American society are the wealthy. The wealthiest are the fittest, and here is where he completely is foobarred. He says they have naturally been selected to live in luxury for the benefit of all society. Nature. What did nature have to do with making someone rich? The idea of rich people are supposed to be rich, they're meant to be rich, and he ties this to genetics. You are genetically predisposed to be more intelligent, richer, and more successful than others. He tries to make it okay by saying, but it's for the benefit of all. In other words, these people who are going to be lead society, they're the natural leaders, they're the wealthy, that who all the rest of us serve, are there for the benefit of all mankind. They will take care of us. They'll make sure we're all taken care of in the right way. They're to be the leaders of society. Um, this is comical and ludicrous and a commonly held belief by the early 1900s among American middle and upper class. In essence, the rich are meant to be rich and the poor are meant to be poor. It's simply the way it is. It's genetics. You were born to be poor. You were born to be less educated. You were born to be rich. You were born to be successful. You were born to be a servant, and you were born to be a master. Yeah. You can imagine how this would have been very appealing to Southern society, which just a few years earlier had been a slave society. You could imagine how that really, again, one of those reasons why they never gave rights to women or to black people. Not surprising. Social Darwinism was really popular among Southern upper class whites. This idea of white male superiority. Oh my God, it's genetics. You're supposed to be that way. Here's a cartoon which I think is interesting. Um, the husband says, "What is social Darwinism?" And the wife says, "Survival of the richest." Really, that's what Sumner's arguing. Um, it was to explain societal excesses. It explained why the rich are supposed to be rich and mega wealthy and live in big mansions, while the rest of us live in little tenement houses with no running water. Um, it also explained the rich poor gap. Again, the rich are supposed to be rich, the poor are supposed to be poor. It's simply the way it is. You were born to be poor, you were born to be rich. Of course, that's ridiculous, but it became the commonly held belief. And out of this evolves the science. And again, this is another, I should actually have it on the slide this way. This is a pseudoscience, that's why it is in quotes. It's not real science, of human breeding. Um, this idea, it's all very controversial too, don't get me wrong. It isn't like everybody agreed on this. But who did agree on it? The majority of people who did agree on it were the people who had the money, had the status, politicians. The people who actually made the rules often bought into social Darwinism to some degree. Uh, so even if the majority of people didn't buy into this, the ones who made all the decisions often did, conveniently enough, because it benefited them. Um, Also arguing to the point of that you could naturally pass on these traits to your children. I'm still talking about number two here. They argue you could pass on these genetic traits of status and wealth to your kids. Yes, a wealth gene. You could actually pass on genetics to your kids where they would be predisposed to be wealthy. Um, they even believed you could train this within a lifetime. You could train someone to have this genetic trait of wealth or status. That is how they explain the nouveau riche. People who started out poor and worked their way to the top. Say someone who started out as a common person and then gets lucky and runs a business and becomes an entrepreneur and becomes wealthy. They would say, well, that still proves the point. What he did in his lifetime was he actually developed the rich gene during his lifetime. Freaking ridiculous. That's how the rich people the rich and upper class can justify their excesses and their status and wealth in so many different ways, which are completely illogical and unscientific. But yes, that's how they explain people that raised themselves up and became wealthy. They developed genetic traits in their lifetime and changed their genes. Genetic evolution, even if it did tie into this, which it doesn't, takes millions of years. For a human lifetime, it takes millions of years for any genetic traits to really manifest changes. So anyway, um, eugenics was the science of human breeding. I'm back on that now. It also often argued that mentally deficit people, mentally ill people, handicapped people, people who were born blind or with birth defects, or people of color, people with mental illness, um, anything that made you not have full, complete control of your faculties and be a quote unquote normal person by standards of the time, we should probably prevent them from reproducing because we don't want them passing those traits on to their kids. We don't want them passing on the intelligence or the mental defect or the physical, if they have a physical deformity or a disability or something. We don't want them passing them on. California has the illustrious, infamous record of being the leader in eugenics in the United States. Not surprising when you consider how much racism there was in this state. It's real sort of ironic today. California is one of the most fair states with the most racial equality, and back then, 100 years ago, it was maybe one of the racist states, racist and prejudicial states. Um, anyway, California and Virginia led the way with thousands and thousands of people being forcibly sterilized. Depression, by the way, is one of the things that sterilized people today, back then for. I've seen numbers that indicate maybe as much as like 1 out of every 4 people in America suffer from depression today. That would be about 90 million people. Is that right? 90 million people? um, good luck, eugenicists. Anyway, yeah, they would come up with any excuse that if you didn't act normal in any way or you were a person of color, this led to further discrimination, further segregation, racism against Asian, African, Native peoples. Um, there was even concerns about inbreeding. The term is miscanization. I may be pronouncing it wrong. The idea of inbreeding between different races, which, by the way, in case you are someone who studies science or biology, race is actually not a real thing. Race is a social construct. There's actually no such thing as races. We're all the same species. There's no races of humans. Just like someone who has brown eyes and blue eyes, that doesn't make them the blue eye race or the brown eyed race any more than someone has brown skin or white skin. Makes them a brown race or a white race. It's simply a genotype. It's simply a manifestation of genetics. We don't have a white or a blonde-haired race and a black-haired race, and a 6 foot tall race and a 4 foot tall race. Okay, skin color is exactly the same. It's simply a physical manifestation of genetics. It has nothing to do with different species. No, it's ridiculous, the idea of race. Nonetheless, we've used race for centuries to discriminate and create oppression. And anyway, we all understand. We're all aware of it. We understand how it is. And they were worried about these races inbreeding. They didn't want people of other colors breeding with whites. Um, One of the best ways to get yourself in trouble as a black man was to have a relationship with a white woman. Uh, in a southern state, you could very well find yourself dead. But in other states where they might not hang you, they would throw you in jail, throw you in prison, charge you with crimes, sterilize you. Yeah, pretty bad. Early 1900s in America was bad, really bad regarding racism, prejudice, discrimination. It was bad. One of the worst in the world, probably. Legislative status of eugenics. This is as of 1935. As of 1935, you have the majority of states in America that have some type of law with eugenic sterilization. So as of 1935, right before World War II, over half the states in the U.S. have some type of laws that allow you to sterilize someone if the courts or a medical system determines you should not reproduce. How crazy is that? To where they can just decide without your consent, we don't want you reproducing and having kids, so we're going to make it so you can't. Pretty crazy. You might think this would never happen anymore. You know what? This still happens. Not in the U.S. This doesn't happen in the U.S. that I'm aware of, but India, for instance, India has forced sterilization laws. China has forced sterilization laws. Um, so, and India is really considered to be sort of a democratic country, and yet China not, but then they still have sterilization laws because they have such a large population, they have a hard time controlling it. So they have laws that allow them to sterilize women, especially poor women or rural women, which is actually still most of India. Really interesting. So you think this is 100 years ago, right? Stuff like this, even maybe not in America, stuff like this still happens in the world. I believe Africa as well. I've heard stories. I've read things. Read an article in NPR a couple years ago about forced sterilizations of women in Central Africa. On a it had something to do with AIDS, something to do with, yeah. I'm not going to go into it, but this is still happening in the world. This kind of stuff. All right, so religion. We're going to talk about religion next, and no, that's actually where we're going to end. We'll end with this section here about religion. So we're almost finished. The arrival of large numbers of Catholics and Jewish people in America really led a lot of people to question whether immigrants should be allowed to remain their native faith or whether they should convert to Protestantism, which most Americans are Protestant. So, yes, we were under, many people in America, many people in government were concerned that all of these people coming into America that were not Protestant were a threat to our Protestant Christianity, afraid they might try to undermine our Christian beliefs. They might try to get positions in government and then change laws. This was 10% of the population. 90% of Americans were still Protestant. So we have 10% of the population who are mostly immigrants. Many of them don't even speak English. They're foreigners who've just come to our country. They're just starting to learn what it is to be American, and this irrational belief that they're going to somehow take over our country or undermine our entire way of life. It's ridiculous, of course, but as I mentioned once before, I think, what is the most dangerous thing in the world? What is it? Fear is the most dangerous thing that exists. Is fear. Fear will make people murder each other. Fear is the most dangerous thing. Fear of the unknown, fear of competition, fear of challenges to authority. And that's what Catholics and Jews represented. And by the way, many people would not have considered Catholics Christians. Obviously, they are, but many people would not have called Catholics Christians. They were so hell bent on their idea of Protestant Christianity being the only proper Christianity. Any other type of Christianity wasn't even really Christian. Um, many people question the practices of the immigrants because the immigrants didn't always look like us, dress like us, act like us, do the jobs like us. They didn't like that many of these groups, many Catholics and Jews, had their own private religious schools. Again, what do you fear? The unknown. So they're afraid. What are they teaching? What are they telling them? Are they in there conspiring to take over America or something like that? What are those terrible Jews and Catholics doing? So you saw this kind of stuff. Um, Now, the Jewish and the Catholic people often made this worse upon themselves due to their own actions. Not that they deserved it, but due to their own actions, they often would keep to themselves. They often formed their own tight knit communities. Many of them tried to speak their traditional languages where they came from. They would form their own businesses, their own organizations. They would often hire just their own people. You know, if someone was a Catholic and he owned a business, he would try to hire Catholic people. Jewish people would hire Jewish people. Um, they were trying to keep these relatively tight knit communities. Now, they did this, of course, for themselves, for safety, for security, for familial reasons. It simply made things better for them. It made transition to a new world better. It made life more satisfying and more structured. However, by doing this, what they did was everyone else would look in on them and say, "Wow, they're not assimilating. Therefore, they're dangerous. We don't know what they're saying. We don't know what they're doing in their churches. We don't know what they're teaching in their schools. They're all staying together in their same neighborhoods. Can we trust them?" Because people are very fearful of the unknown. So this made discrimination and prejudice against them even greater. Combine that with the decline in church participation in America. From the American Civil War to 1900, we see general participation in American churches decline by about 20%. The number one reason for this, we believe, is industrialization. Simply, people working in the cities and the factories were simply working, they didn't have time. When you're working 12, 14 hours a day, 6 days a week, do you have time to go to church? You have one day off a week. On that one day off, you want to relax. You want to have some leisure time. You want to spend time with your family. So simply the industrial America, we think, is probably the most significant reason. Because if you ask people, everyone will still say very clearly they believe in God. So why did they stop going to church? Because they were simply too busy with trying to survive, especially in the cities. Well, you decline that church participation, that means a lot of Protestant leaders are very scared. They see people falling away from the church, they see a rising level of other religious faiths, and it scares the shit out of them. It just does. Um, so they wanted them to assimilate, to be part of American society. Of course, the best way to assimilate would be to convert to Protestant. That's another problem. Most Catholics and Jews do not convert. They generally stay with their religious beliefs. They don't come here and suddenly, oh, we're in America, let's be Protestant. That doesn't really happen. So that also brings a lot of fear of Protestants. Why don't they convert? Is their religion better than ours? Are they hiding something? You know. So generally, we got resistance. They might try to assimilate economically, socially, to some degree, but resistance was actually very common. It isn't that they didn't want to be American, they simply felt comfort in their own culture, and they didn't feel the need to have to change their entire culture when they came to a new country. But Americans often thought they should change their culture to match our culture. Yeah. So you put all this together, this lack of assimilation. I mean, some did assimilate. Certainly some did. Uh, but this general lack of assimilation, lots of resistance. They have all their own businesses, their own churches. Um, yeah, it causes lots of problems for them. Lots of backlash from the majority Protestant communities in America. Well, one of the solutions to this was the social gospel. Using political pressure and religious pressure to try and change them, to get them to convert, to show them how great Protestants are, social outreach, um, uh, to evangelize, to get them to convert over. We build YMCAs for immigrants to get immigrants to come in, YMCAs to help Christianize local communities. By the 1880s, 1890s, YMCAs are much more open than they were when they were originally created. And so we have more open opportunities for immigrants and foreigners. Build poorhouses, because when people got off the boat, they were usually poor. Most people that came off the boat were, for many families, they spent their last dime to book passage to America. Most of them had just the stuff they were carrying, so they were often poor. So they built poorhouses to try and sort of give outreach to immigrants, to convince immigrants that why Protestantism is the best religion, that kind of stuff. Um, this was done in ways of the YMCA's. I said this was sort of a way of revealing their faith and the power of God through outreach and providing service, to show how superior and how good Protestant faith was. So they did this through these public welfare programs, these social justice efforts, temperance societies. Try to get people to stop drinking, convincing them that by abstaining from alcohol, you'll have a more satisfying life, you'll be healthier, all this kind of stuff. And Protestants tried to push that. While large amount of drinking wasn't common among Jewish populations, there was quite a bit of drinking among Catholic populations, especially Irish Catholics. Irish Catholics were a large, alcohol was a very big part of the community. So trying to get them to abstain from alcohol use, for instance. A lot of this had a backlash. A lot of the immigrant community said, "You're trying to change us. We're happy with the way we are." Um, we did find some people that went for it, though, especially women who thought they were being abused by their husbands. They would have certainly jumped on this idea of temperance. And if you could convert the wife over to another faith, well, there's certainly a chance there the wife could convert the husband. And then, of course, if the husband and wife are converted, you get the kids. So if you could get the wife to follow the ideas of temperance because she wants to have a better home life, then you could see where it could spread. So you actually see where they had ways of trying to do this. We also had organizations in England which had done the same thing. Salvation Army, for instance, was an English organization. Um, and we borrow that. It was highly effective in bringing thousands, tens of thousands of people back to the Protestant faith, both foreigners and immigrants who were not Protestant, and then also remember the 20% who had fallen off, the 20% decline in participation, people who, if you asked them, they would say they're Protestant, but they didn't go to church. and the Salvation Army and a lot of these outreach efforts are just as much focused on immigrants as the Protestant Americans who have fallen away from the church. Either one's a success. If you get a conversion or if you get someone who's fallen from the church to come back, either one's a success story. So they would do things to show how you could repent of your sins, because if you've fallen away from the church, you've had sins, right? So you could repent of your sins. We could also help you: soup kitchens, libraries, shelter, homeless shelters, uh, all kinds of things to help the poor, working class people, Americans, and immigrants. It didn't matter who they got to come back to the faith as long as they were getting numbers. This is successful, by the way. I guess I'll go ahead and give you the numbers now. They actually do. By the early 1900s, we do actually see most of this starts in the late 1880s, 1890s. By 19 teens, church participation in America has gone right back up again, almost 20%. So everything that they had lost from the 1860s that had dropped by the 1890s, by 1910, they'd regained most of it. This was also one of the Great Awakenings, which I haven't really talked about. This is the third Great Awakening, I think, in this time period. Second, third, one of them. We've had 4 or 5. And I'm not going to go into detail on it, so you don't need to know about it. But it's just a revival of religious faith in America. That's the idea of the Great Awakening. You have the extreme end of the social gospel. This here appealed to lots of people. Lots of people felt this and this appealed to them, because many people felt that the Protestant Christian faiths were helping them. And if you're helping, then you're worthy of our consideration. You're worthy of us maybe joining you. Well, you then had the extreme end, these fundamentalists, these that were focused on what I like to call hell and brimstone preachers. These are typically very strict conservatives, very much concerned about the loss of church participation, very much concerned about rising secularism, which means non-religious views in America. They were definitely anti-feminist. They believed women as a very, very distinct subservient role, very much in line with the Bible. They were concerned about immigrants coming in with other faiths. They were militant. Don't get me wrong, they didn't actually go out and like kill people or use weapons, but their aggression towards conversions was militant. It was aggressive. It was just this side of forced conversions. They would gather large groups of people, immigrants, off the boat. They would have these big meetings. They would go around and baptize people. They would have requirements. We're going to give you help, soup kitchens, bread lines, shelters, but only if you convert over to Christianity, or only if you get baptized, only if you come to church services. So the only way you get help is if you at least appear to be converting to Protestantism or listening to the Protestant message. Now that's an extreme end. A lot of these didn't do that. A lot of these social gospelers were generally open door. When you come in, they might try to convert you, but they didn't force you to convert. But the fundamentalists, the very extreme end of it, it was pretty much like a do or die thing, figuratively. You either do it or we're not going to have anything to do with you, because we're the only proper faith. Billy Sunday, Dwight Moody were a couple of these. They had meetings. These very fundamentalists would meet every year up in Niagara Falls area. They had these Bible meetings every single year with the sole purpose of trying to find a way to combat secularism and increase sacred faith in America, Protestant sacred faith in America. They also believed the only actual truth that existed was the Protestant Bible, the Protestant Christian Bible. No other faith was justified or allowed. Again, this is to use a Muslim word, this is a jihad. This is a version of what we would call Christian jihad, really. Very aggressive, militant Christianization of people due to the fear that if we do not do this, America is going to, in essence, succumb to hell and brimstone and destruction. Yeah, these two fundamentalists. Billy Sunday was interesting. I'll show you a picture of Billy Sunday. Billy Sunday would have these large meetings. He would stand up in front and preach for hours. He was known to preach for sometimes over 8 hours at a time, never opening the Bible. He memorized it. He knew every passage. He knew every scripture. He could recite hundreds of scriptures. He could talk for hours on end, converting over thousands of people in one day. Baptisms. He would like walk down the aisles and touch them, and people wrote about him and said he was like there's some there was a lady that wrote a story about him, and I don't even remember the name of it. I read it in a book years ago. She said when she looked at him, she could actually see the Holy Ghost actually like overlaid his body. She could actually see like the Spirit of God emanating from him. It's how people saw him. People that really bought into it, and they really believed that he was practically like a prophet of God. I don't know that he preached that way. I don't think he like pretended to be a prophet of God, but people saw him that way. Some definitely saw him that way. And he was the hell and brimstone preacher. He was the kind of guy that would say things like, if you don't do this, if you don't come back to God, literally hell's gaping maw is just waiting to swallow you up and consume your soul. You are, if you don't convert today, right now, you are going to have, your soul is going to be damned to eternal damnation and stuff like that. Pretty intense stuff. This is Salvation Army. This is a woman. Salvation Army did lots of this social gospel outreach. Here we're down on the Bowery. This would be the area typically close to the docks, close to the ships, the poor part of town. Um, and usually you'd find houses of prostitution, you'd find brothels, you'd find prostitutes on the street, you'd find lots of bars, of course, illegal operations. And here we have a lady from the Salvation Army trying to give her journal, the news journal of the Salvation Army called War Cry, to a man who looks like he's going into a bar, Steve Brody's bar here, probably with a prostitute. The fact she has a red top on, red was often associated with prostitution. So he's probably going into a bar here with a prostitute. She's looking away. And he's telling her to go cry, war cry. Now go chase yourself. Well, here's a little curse word, spoiler alert. What he's saying in modern vernacular is no, go fuck yourself. That's exactly what he's saying. Um, I want nothing to do with your war cry. I want nothing to do with your social gospel. Go away. I want to go drink and go be with my prostitute. Um, this is what Salvation was trying to do, trying to get people to repent of their sins. They were a vice squad, sort of. Really interesting stuff. This was one of the most interesting time periods in American history. It really is to study socially, culturally. This turn of the century time was very interesting and intriguing. Not necessarily a good way, don't get me wrong. I mean, much of this is simply bad. Much of this is simply bad. So much of the prejudice, etc., that's going on in the racism. But as far as actually interesting, the way people saw things and how much aggression there was and how much difference and controversy there was, very interesting. All right, so that ends the chapter. And I appreciate you watching, and we will see you in the next chapter. Take care.